Why, hello there. It's been a while, hasn't it? And contrary to, it seems, popular belief, I'm still alive. Actually received an email a few months ago asking whether I was still alive and kicking, because my last video sort of left on an ominous note of me venturing out into the pandemic in the most infected area in the world at the time, and that was that. But no, overall things have been far better than they probably should be in this year, and I ended up moving with my girlfriend to a town in the countryside because we kind of decided that there was nothing holding us to the cities. The main benefit of being in a city had eroded, which does bring our topic of today's video. COVID has the potential to reshape how we think about the city, because COVID has very distinctly shown the differences in wealth considerably. I mean, the first people to start fleeing urban areas were the extremely wealthy. Not the millionaires, but the billionaires. They started renting or buying the private jets. The prices started skyrocketing. And they started moving to communities that were unaffected, and also going to countries, small island nations, that were only accepting the cream of the crop and only with a bill of clean health. So in that way, they are shielded. Besides that, they have mansions and whatnot, second homes in low-density areas. But irrespective of this, slowly over time, the middle class has also started doing this. You can see this all over the place. Say, for example, in New York, you started seeing a lack of U-Hauls, for example, because everyone was renting vans to just get the fuck out of Dodge. And thus, this is a market movement, whereas before, going to the city, going to the economic hubs was the dream. Now the dream is to get the hell out of there. And this is because cities are no longer the economic areas that they once were. This is often crippling small businesses. Say, for example, in London there is something called the City of London, which is sort of a city within a city. Due to some technicalities in the legal system, it counts as its own entity. Anyway, but this area is a ghost town. Only office workers used to live there, and all the businesses surrounding that area are essentially dead at this point, and with no hope of ever recovering in the near future. So a lot of this infrastructure that depends on the office worker, that depends on the urbanite, is dying out. So all of a sudden, the people who can make money online, they have little reason to stay in the carcass of what was once a great area. So they start looking at elsewhere. Admittedly, this is a very unscientific sample, but every single white-collar immigrant I knew in London is either already elsewhere or is planning on going elsewhere. Sometimes behind their company's backs, as it's difficult from a tax perspective because the legal tax system is not really designed for remote work. But slowly, things are adapting. More countries are offering e-visas and whatnot. But be that as it may, presently a lot of people who can do remote work are doing remote work, even if their company isn't aware of where they are. But this opens up another problem. Where do you go? You can literally work from anywhere. So the issue with the young urbanite is that they likely already migrated. They've voluntarily severed their connection to their hometown, perhaps over the span of several years. So while family is still a draw to them, it's not the main pull to them. So this opens up several possibilities. But at their core, people are lonely. The pandemic is not helping matters, because at the end of the day, you just want a community with people whom you understand. Up until a certain point, the office was that nexus for people, that source of connection, but that is gone. So now with a bunch of free time, what do? You focus on your interests and the communities that spring around those interests. And while moving to the countryside town that I now live in, the realtor told me there has been an explosion of interest from people who live in big cities. A bunch of people just want to move. But why go to a random town, though? As I said before, you need that community. You'd go where friends and common interests are. kind of like already happens in expat communities. For example, in, say, Mexico, where you can find entire communities of American lawyers, dentists, who happen to retire in random towns. In other words, a single dentist, lawyer, whatever, decades ago, decided to go somewhere, and his friend followed him, and then the friend of a friend, and then the friend of a friend of a friend, and so on. So all of a sudden, they started creating little enclaves in these towns. And vice versa also happens. When Mexicans go to the US illegally, they often bring the uncle, the friend, whatever. So all of a sudden, in certain states in the US, you start seeing a lot of people from the same communities. This chain migration, as it's called, is very common. But now, for the first time ever, the young urbanite may also become a part in chain migration. They will bring their friends, they will bring their acquaintances to these smaller communities where they could start representing a sizable percentage of the population. Because for decades now, the countryside, these towns have been dying. The demographics are old. So all of a sudden, these can jumpstart entire communities. The white-collar public is now atomized. Their true source of interactions are their hobbies. And this is not a new desire. For example, you have Van Gogh, who wanted to create a painter community back in the day. It didn't work because he was a mean old spirit and not enough of the big wigs in the post-impressionist scene decided to go and follow this. So there has always been that desire to link up with people in like-minded community. It used to happen, for example, back when gays were not all that accepted, that within cities they created a little enclave where being gay was tolerated. Over time, these created vibrant communities that had their own little culture, their own little nightlife, and eventually they would be gentrified. But we constantly see this desire of people wanting to move, to create a society of like-minded people. So, while not a guarantee, I think this is the first time where we have a unique set of circumstances that are rebalancing the net benefits of living in a city. All of a sudden, there is the very, very real competition of just living elsewhere. And imagine that. Over time, you could start having a painter town. You could start having a writer town, because one guy who just likes writing invites his friend that works in a completely different industry, but who has a writing hobby. And then that friend brings another friend from the writing community, and so on and so on. You can have these little communities, kind of like how we used to have the gay communities in the past. And I don't think that these will be gentrified quite as easily as the gay scenes used to be, because these are entirely different geographic areas. A rich person does not have quite the same desire to move into a completely different city if he doesn't already know people within that area. Say, for example, if you're in London and you gentrify Camden, it's not a huge movement to go from Camden to Russell Square or to the city centre. Whereas if you live, say, in Canterbury versus London, then that's more of a jump. So all of a sudden, you start having these communities that have moats. And over the years, if they don't move back to the cities over the next few years, they will start representing the voice of the community as the older generation dies off. They will be the heirs to this community, to this town. And thus, while not a guarantee, this might be the birth of an entirely different set of settlements.